Thank you, and thank you to the panel for your testimony. It is said and was said in the opening that NATO is not about a specific opposition to a specific country or a threat, but certainly seems to be a lot of discussion of Russia in this, admitting a new country into NATO. Do you see no negative aspects to admitting Montenegro into NATO? Mr. Yee.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I do not see any negatives in terms of U.S. interests for admitting Montenegro into NATO, only positives.
And you mentioned that we're sending a message that nobody gets to veto. You know, we're sending this tough guy message. You want to send them a louder message? Why don't you admit Georgia?
So, Senator, thank you for the question. We do support the aspirations of Georgia to join NATO.
And you think there's no negative to admitting Georgia into NATO as well?
We support their aspirations to join NATO, Senator, and we believe...
Part of Georgia is occupied, right, by Russia?
Yes, and we
if
support...
we admitted Georgia into NATO and they said, well, what about Article 5? We would be at war with Russia. Sounds like there are profound implications to admitting Georgia into NATO.
There would be implications. There are implications for admitting any country into NATO. What I would say, Senator, is that what NATO allies agreed at the last summit in Warsaw is that the door remains open to Georgia, that Georgia continues to need to do its homework. It needs to prepare for membership. The consensus on which NATO operates in all of its decisions for admitting Georgia has not been met yet.
Who do you think it's more important to have diplomatic ties with, Russia or Montenegro?
Senator, frankly, I don't think it's a choice between diplomatic ties between one country or the other.
Well, I would say that there is a downside, and that if you want to have improved relations with Russia, thumbing their nose or putting Georgia into NATO or trying to put Ukraine into NATO, there are ramifications to this. And these aren't just benign things, oh, hey, we all want to be Democrats and let's all join NATO. There are ramifications. And for us to think that this is an exercise in, hey, we're going to thumb our nose at Russia, you know, we're in the middle of a conflict in Syria where, by most analysis, including the administration, Russia is part of the solution. Russia may be also part of the problem, but ultimately they're probably part of the solution. And I just don't think it's very realistic, and I think it's a sort of an arrogant, one-sided view of the world to think, oh, hey, let's just have everybody in NATO. You know, why don't we, you know, get, you know, all the STAN countries north of Afghanistan, ask them to be part of NATO. You know, I mean, are there ramifications to getting all the Soviet satellite countries into NATO? Sure there are. And so I think we need to think this through, and we need to have a little bit more of a debate rather than a rah, 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 let's put everybody in NATO. I think admitting Georgia to NATO would be a huge disaster and would be a huge step back if you want to have any kind of Russia's help in resolving what happens in Syria. So I don't know. I think that we could have heard another side in this hearing as far as a more balanced approach to whether or not there are ramifications. I think to say there's no ramifications of admitting Montenegro, it is a small country, so it's not nearly as great a ramifications as Georgia. But to say there are no, and that our avowed purpose is really to tell Russia, you can't tell us what to do, sounds a little schoolyardish to me, and maybe not all completely thought through or a balanced opinion. So you're both free to respond.
Senator, if I could just say that I would agree that there are certainly ramifications to admitting any country into NATO, and I certainly didn't mean to imply there were not. My answer was that I do not believe there are any negative downsides for the United States' interests in admitting Montenegro. And I would also say that all countries that wish to join NATO need to be evaluated for their candidacy for admission into NATO individually, on their merits, and in due course, not all at once, and not together as a group. We do weigh very carefully, Senator, the ramifications, the consequences. We consider it the most solemn commitment one nation can make to another in admitting a country into NATO. But we believe that it is the decision for NATO and the aspirant countries themselves to make, that no country should have a veto over the decision.
I think it's a little bit Pollyannish also to believe that, you know, sort of this is a mutual treaty. This is the U.S. protecting other countries. We are NATO. you know? And so I think really we're looking at a tiny little country that we take all of the risk to protect Montenegro, or we take all of the risk to defend Georgia or Ukraine. And so I don't think these are really two-way street. I think this is kind of a one-way street. You know, we're the ones that spend all the money on our military. We spend more on our military than the next 8 countries combined. There's a lot of talk of spending 2%, but these people spend a minuscule amount, not just Montenegro, but all of NATO. And so I think there does need to be a discussion. Is it important for Europe to stick together? Is it more important for Europe to maybe have an alliance with Montenegro? Probably. But, you know, we borrow $1 million a minute. We have a $20 trillion debt. And I think we ought to think through whether these are it's a two-way street or whether it's a one-way street where we're going to be picking up the tab for the rest of the world. Dr. Carpenter, you had a comment?
Senator, I was just going to say that the percentage of NATO's common funding that the United States contributes to is about 22%, so it is larger than any other ally, for sure. However, going back to the comment about Montenegro, small economy, small military, small country, what I would say is that the accession of Montenegro to NATO is not primarily about thumbing a nose at Russia. Certainly Russia is not pleased that Montenegro is joining, but Montenegro is fundamentally joining on its own merits. So it's made the difficult reforms, both to the defense and the intelligence sectors and to its rule of law institutions, but it's also been with us in Afghanistan for these past 10 years that it's been an independent country, so it's demonstrated its solidarity in that way. It's adopted sanctions against Russia for its actions in Ukraine, which it didn't have to do, but again, to show solidarity with NATO and EU countries. So they have shown that they've been with us, and although they are small and their military capabilities are what they are, they have been with us for this time. And so I think the important point is they're judged on their own merits here and not as a rebuke to, or as a thumbing of nose at Russia.